So today our focus is going to be on ecosystems. Mostly, at first, we're going to be looking at a lot of the cycling between matter and energy, between abiotic reservoirs and biotic reservoirs, as well as applying some more of the laws of thermodynamics, and then we'll take a look at biomes. A lot of the things you see today hopefully will be review, okay, but you still need to be sure that you have a thorough understanding of them, not just a memorization of the definition. Okay, so first of all, as we're talking about the ecosystem, remember the ecosystem contains it contains the community, okay, as well as the abiotic factors involved. So we're talking about here cycling between of the matter and the energy. You can see that happening up here in this first diagram, okay, up here on the left. You can see the energy flowing, cycling from the sun into the plants, the herbivores, through the consumers, heat being released back out into the atmosphere, which comes back to our laws of thermodynamics, right? That in particular, that second law of thermodynamics, that the energy is always, all the energy transfers are going to result in our increase in entropy. Remember our first law of thermodynamics being that the energy can neither be created nor destroyed. The second law stating that all of those energy transfers are going to act as to increase entropy. Okay? And so in biology, we are constantly trying to harness the energy. Okay? We're trying to create order. But that the way we're able to adhere to this second law of thermodynamics is that these organisms are always releasing heat back into the environment. So there is an overall increase in entropy. On this diagram on the right here, you can see how that's happening. Okay? These organisms here are trying to create order. When they're harnessing energy to produce cells, they are creating order. But when they're releasing all of this heat, okay, that is increasing entropy. And again, it's the overall increase in entropy is what adheres to the laws of physics, of that second law of thermodynamics. Okay, but these things are constantly being circled and cycled between the abiotic and biotic factors. So primary production is the production of the organic compounds from atmospheric or aquatic carbon dioxide. You can see on the left here the photosynthesis process using the atmospheric carbon dioxide to help produce those organic compounds. Over here on the right, okay, the aquatic carbon dioxide here acting as a source here to produce the organic compounds. So this can occur via photosynthesis, okay, or chemosynthesis. Okay, remember, photosynthesis, we're using the light energy. Okay, you're taking the solar energy and harnessing that and converting it. Chemosynthesis, remember, they're using chemicals here to form those organic compounds. You see hydrogen sulfide being the source in that particular picture there. Okay, our primary productivity is going to be the rate at which this production happens. So if we saw this on a graph, we could calculate it by calculating slope. Okay, so our primary productivity is how quickly or how slowly this production of organic compounds is happening from the CO2. So our gross primary productivity, that's abbreviated, sometimes you'll see that abbreviated just as the GPP. Okay, so the gross primary productivity is the total amount of energy that the producers have converted to chemical energy in the organic molecules per unit of time. Okay, so this is basically all of the energy that they have harnessed, okay, and that they have converted into the sugars or the carbohydrates. That's our chemical energy in the organic molecules. Okay, so remember, a lot of times these are our sugars or carbohydrates per unit of time. Okay, our net productivity is going to be the energy that is available for the other organisms. Basically, it's what the producer didn't use, but it has to be during that same production time. Okay, so during the same time that they are harnessing the energy and converting it to the chemical energy in the organic molecules, the net primary productivity is during that same period of time the energy that would be available for other organisms, okay, because the initial producer was not using it. Okay? Very similar to like a paycheck. You have your gross income versus your net income. your gross income being your total income, your net income being what you actually take home after you've taken out taxes and insurance and whatever else it is that may be coming out of your paycheck. Let's look at some of the differences between productivity and various biomes. Okay, so if you look at the first one here, this is the percentage of the Earth's surface area that it covers. And you can see that open ocean has the largest surface area that it covers on the Earth. The second graph here is your average net primary production, okay, which is highest here then in the algal beds and reefs. And the third one here is the percentage of Earth's net primary productivity. So if you look on this third graph, the highest here is again our open ocean. Okay? So average net primary production was very small for the ocean. Okay? However, there's so much ocean that it is a large percentage of the Earth's in total net primary production. And even though the average net primary production of the algal beds and reefs is very high, there's so few of that, the surface area of that biome is so small, that translates into a very small percentage of the Earth's total net primary productivity. So as we're talking about this productivity, just a reminder, remember we have our 10% rule, right, that about 10% of the energy is passed on, available for the next organism. You can see that happening here. Energy is represented as joules, usually, okay, or kilocalories. So if you see either one of those things, you need to be thinking of an energy unit. Okay, we're not going to review food webs. We are not going to review food chains. Some of these ecology things I'm going to take for granted that you know. Okay, that you know that if I alter the food web, you can analyze and determine what would happen to the organisms that both eat that or are dependent upon that for a food source. And so if y'all need to review food webs and food chains, you need to be sure you do that on your own. So looking here at the human diet in terms of productivity, energy efficiency, okay, let's look at the energy efficiency of diets for humans of a vegetarian versus a carnivore. Okay, if you look, because of your 10% rule and where we fall, it's actually more energy efficient, okay, to be a vegetarian. Okay. You are not going to require, okay, as much food to meet the same energy requirements. Okay, so let's do a little bit of pyramid review now. We've seen some of these pyramids before. These are examples here of biomass pyramids. You guys have seen a biomass pyramid your freshman year. Okay. Biomass is dried biological matter that was living or was recently living. Biomass is measured by you gather the mass of the organism after all the water has been removed from the substance. So if you were talking about a potato, you'd have to pull all the water out of it. If you're talking about a bug, you'd have to let them dehydrate, and then you can measure the biomass. So in these biomass pyramids, the first one up top here, this is a Florida bog. And so you can see the primary producers here have the largest biomass. Okay. In the English Channel, though, however, your primary producers have a very small biomass, especially compared to the consumers, okay, which seems kind of contradictory to what you would normally think. Okay. If these are that providing the energy source for the entire ecosystem, the foundation for the entire ecosystem, it seems like there should be a significant number of them, and a significant number of them enough to make an impact on their mass. And so when you're looking at this English Channel pyramid, we're talking about phytoplankton here. Okay? Phytoplankton are microscopic organisms. However, they do grow very quickly. And so as they are able to grow basically at a rate fast enough that they can support the primary consumers. Their primary productivity is still able to pass on to the next level very large amounts because their growth rate is so quick. And so as a primary producer, they are still able to support the primary consumers. So here we have an example of a numbers pyramid. Okay? Numbers pyramids are exactly what they sound like. They're the actual number of the organism. They are usually traditional looking in shape of a typical pyramid, with your primary producers being the largest numbers-wise. You may occasionally see that inverted pyramid where the primary producer level is a little bit smaller. That can occur sometimes in a forest that has very, very large trees. And so basically just due to their size, there cannot be that many of them, comparatively speaking, numbers-wise, to your primary consumers, when you have a number of insects and herbivores living in this forest. So you can occasionally see an inverted numbers pyramid with a forest like that. So our next section here is going to focus on the biogeochemical cycles. And our biogeochemical cycles is just the big fancy terms for things like water cycle, carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle. It's your interactions here between your abiotic and biotic, your abiotic factors, your organisms, your geological processes. Okay, and so, like I said, these would consist of your carbon cycle, your water cycle, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus, sulfur. You are not going to need to memorize the steps of all of these cycles. You are, however, going to need to be able to interpret interruption to the cycle, graphics involving the cycles. So as you look on this picture here, you can see you've got your geological process here, okay, that stores that then in an abiotic reservoir, which then makes the nutrients available to producers. Okay, and so as they pass through the producers to the consumers, they'll eventually end up back in this abiotic reservoir. So the resources are constantly cycling between the biotic organisms, the hosts, and then the reservoirs of the abiotics with the geological processes, the abiotic factors. These cycles produce the base resources along with the sun. These are our base resources for transformation into usable energy sources for the consumers. So we're looking here at the nitrogen cycle. Okay, so the nitrogen cycle is what's called a global cycle. It is a global cycle because it does go into the atmosphere. Okay, and so it have a global impact here. Bacteria are very important in the nitrogen cycle. If y'all remember this from your freshman year, you have a multitude of, you have a wide variety of bacteria that are involved in this cycle that have a non-replaceable role. If those bacteria are not there, then this nitrogen cycle cannot continue. You don't have the conversions that you need to convert this nitrogen that's in the atmosphere into usable nitrogen for the organisms, as well as then convert it back into the atmospheric nitrogen. Human impact can have a major impact on this cycle. Increases in nitrogen can acidify soil. It can lead to eutrophication. It can be found in the water supply. And excess nitrogen is usually found in runoff due to fertilizers that have been added to the soil. Okay, so here we have the phosphorus cycle. This is not one of the ones we talked about your freshman year, but again, you don't need to memorize the steps of the cycle. Okay, this one is not a global cycle. It does not have a gaseous phase, so it never enters the atmosphere. Okay, so a lot of your other cycles, eventually at some point it will turn into a gas, and the phosphorus does not do that. So it's not considered a global cycle. Human impact can have a really big influence on this cycle. Phosphorus is, as a general rule, our leading factor here for eutrophication. Okay, we talked about eutrophication your freshman year. We'll talk about it some more in a few minutes. Remember, this is when you have that algae bloom or the phytoplankton increase. Then these producers die, and as they're being decomposed, the bacteria are consuming the oxygen, and you end up with dead fish. And remember, it was not a good thing for the ecosystem. But like I said, we'll review that again in just a moment, okay, and look at some more pictures with it. So the water cycle here, okay, this one, hopefully you realize again, would be a global cycle. The sun is going to be your driving force here with the water cycle. The amount of water on the Earth stays relatively constant, but its distribution in its three states may vary between its gas, liquid, and solid forms. Okay, but the amount overall